Teenager buys old camera at yard sale, finds photos of a vanished person. Eli Palmer had a habit of scavenging yard sales. At 17, most of his friends spent their weekends at parties or glued to their phones, but Eli preferred the thrill of digging through forgotten things. He'd always had a strange connection to objects with a history: old records, postcards, rusted tools. Something about holding items that had passed through countless hands fascinated him. On that particular Saturday, Eli found himself drawn to an ordinary yard sale, set up outside an old house on a quiet street near the edge of town. The house was tucked away behind towering oaks, and its front lawn was cluttered with tables overflowing with trinkets, books, and worn-out furniture. He didn't expect to find anything special, but it was always worth a look. As he wandered through the rows of items, something on the farthest table caught his eye: a dusty, weathered Polaroid camera. The once shiny black body of the camera was now dull with age, its edges worn smooth from years of use. It was a Polaroid 600, the kind that instantly printed photos. Eli felt a spark of nostalgia as he picked it up, remembering how his grandfather used to carry one just like it on family trips. "How much for this?" Eli asked the elderly woman seated behind the table, who had been watching him with a lazy smile. Her eyes twinkled as she glanced at the camera in his hands. "That old thing? $5 and it's yours." Eli fished a crumpled bill from his pocket and handed it to her. "Does it still work?" She shrugged. "No idea, but it might have a few shots left. Last time I used it was years ago." He thanked her, took his new treasure, and headed home, feeling oddly satisfied with his find. It wasn't like Eli to feel excited about something so simple, but there was something about the camera that felt significant, like it was more than just a piece of outdated technology. Back in his bedroom, Eli placed the camera on his desk, right next to a shelf filled with his other finds: old records, coins from other countries, postcards with faded messages written in cursive. His room was like a museum of lost things. He wasn't sure what he planned to do with the camera, but curiosity got the better of him. He flipped it open and found an old film cartridge inside. To his surprise, it still had a few shots left. "Well, let's see if you still work," he muttered, aiming the camera at his bedroom window. He pressed the button, and the camera made a familiar mechanical click followed by the soft whir of film rolling out. A blank white rectangle slid out from the front. Eli watched as the photo began to develop, colors slowly emerging on the glossy surface. He didn't expect much, but as the image cleared, his heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the picture itself that startled him, it was what was in the picture. The photo showed the view from his window, the street outside, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. But in the bottom corner, there was something else. A figure. A person, standing in the distance, half obscured by shadow. Eli blinked and brought the photo closer to his face. The figure was just barely visible, like it was fading into the scenery. He couldn't make out any details: no face, no clothes, but the shape was unmistakable. A person, watching from afar. "What the hell?" he whispered, feeling a shiver run down his spine. His first thought was that it was just a glitch, a flaw in the film, or maybe the light had caught something in the background. But as he looked out the window, there was no one there. The street was empty, and the only sound was the distant hum of a lawnmower. Eli tried to shake off the weird feeling and took another photo, this time pointing the camera at his messy closet. The camera buzzed, and another Polaroid slid out. He waited for the image to develop, his fingers tapping anxiously on his desk. Nothing unusual this time, just a picture of clothes piled on the floor, shoes scattered haphazardly. Eli let out a breath, chuckling nervously to himself. "Probably just a glitch," he said aloud, as if to reassure himself. But when he glanced back at the first photo, the figure was still there, unchanged, still watching. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the strange image in his mind. He kept the photos in a drawer, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw that shadowy figure lurking in the corner of his vision. The rational part of his mind told him it was nothing, a trick of the light, a defect in the film, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next morning, Eli decided to test the camera again. He grabbed it off his desk and headed out for a walk, hoping to clear his head. His neighborhood was quiet, the streets lined with tall trees and old houses. He wandered aimlessly, snapping pictures as he went, an old church at the corner, a rusty playground, and finally, the woods that bordered the town. As he walked deeper into the woods, he felt the stillness around him grow heavier. There was a strange silence here, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. He aimed the camera at the trees and took a final picture before heading home. Back in his room, Eli laid out the photos on his bed, watching them develop. The playground looked normal, just empty swings swaying in the breeze. The church was still and quiet. But the photo of the woods made his blood run cold. The figure was there again, this time closer, standing between the trees. It was the same shadowy shape, but now he could make out more detail. The figure was taller than Eli had first thought, and it seemed to be facing him directly. Its features were still indistinct, but there was something menacing about the way it loomed in the shadows, as if it were watching him. Eli's hands shook as he stared at the image. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't a coincidence. Whoever, or whatever, this figure was, it wasn't just an illusion. Determined to find answers, Eli decided to return to the yard sale where he had bought the camera. Maybe the woman who sold it to him could shed some light on its strange behavior. But when he arrived at the house, it was empty. The tables were gone, the lawn bare, and there was no sign of the woman. Confused, Eli knocked on the door, but no one answered. The house looked different than it had just a few days ago, dilapidated, the windows dirty and cracked. It didn't make sense. Had he imagined the whole thing? He turned to leave, but something made him glance back at the house one last time. Through the grimy window, he saw a flicker of movement, just for a second, but it was enough to send a chill down his spine. There was no one there, right? Eli hurried home, his mind racing with possibilities. Had he stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to? Was the camera cursed, or was it simply playing tricks on his mind? Days passed, and Eli couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. He stopped taking pictures, afraid of what he might see, but the old photos still haunted him. The figure seemed to grow more distinct each time he looked at them, as though it was becoming more real. Late one evening, after another sleepless night, Eli made a decision. He couldn't let this mystery go unsolved. He grabbed the camera and a flashlight, then headed out to the woods where he had taken that last, chilling photo. The woods were darker than he remembered, the trees twisting together like gnarled fingers. The path was overgrown, barely visible beneath the underbrush, but Eli pressed on, his heart pounding in his chest. The deeper he went, the more oppressive the air became, until every breath felt like a struggle. Finally, he reached the clearing where he had taken the last photo. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. Eli stood in the middle of the clearing, his breath visible in the cold night air, and raised the camera. He snapped a picture, the flash illuminating the trees for just a moment. The familiar buzz of the camera filled the silence, and the Polaroid slid out. Eli held his breath as the image began to develop. At first, the photo seemed normal, just the clearing, empty and quiet. But as the colors deepened, the figure began to emerge once again, standing at the edge of the frame. This time, Eli could see it more clearly than ever before. The figure was no longer just a shadow. It was a boy, about Eli's age, with pale skin and dark, hollow eyes. He wore an old-fashioned jacket, his face twisted in an expression of sorrow or fear. Eli's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the face. The boy in the photo was Daniel Riley, the same boy who had disappeared 5 years ago. Daniel Riley had vanished without a trace, lost in these very woods during a school camping trip. The town had searched for weeks, but no one ever found him. His disappearance had become a ghost story, something parents told their kids to keep them from wandering too far from home. But now Eli was staring at his ghost, trapped in a photo. His hands trembled as he flipped the photo over, hoping for some clue. And there, scrawled in faint, jagged handwriting, were 2 words: "Help me." Eli's blood ran cold. He looked up from the photo, his flashlight shaking in his hand. There was no sign of the boy in the clearing, but the message was clear. Daniel, or whatever was left of him, was trapped, and the camera was the only link to his prison. Without thinking, Eli snapped another photo of the clearing, his fingers moving on autopilot. The camera buzzed, the film slid out, and Eli watched it develop with a mixture of fear and determination. This time, the boy was standing in the middle of the clearing, his eyes locked onto Eli's. His mouth was open, as if he were trying to speak. Beneath the image, more words appeared, as though scratched into the film itself. "Find the cabin." Eli's heart raced. He had no idea where to start looking, but he knew one thing: he couldn't stop now. The camera was leading him somewhere, and he had to follow. He tucked the photos into his pocket and turned toward the deeper part of the woods, where the trees grew thicker and the air colder. He walked for what felt like hours, the forest growing darker with each step. Just when he thought he had lost his way, he saw it. An old, abandoned cabin, hidden deep within the woods, its roof sagging and its windows shattered. It looked as though it had been forgotten for decades, consumed by the wilderness around it. Eli approached cautiously, the weight of the camera heavy in his hand. He stepped through the rotting doorframe, his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The inside of the cabin was worse than he'd imagined, damp, filled with the stench of decay. But it was what was on the walls that stopped him in his tracks. Photos, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, were pinned to the walls, covering every inch of the cabin. They were all Polaroids, like the ones Eli had been taking, and they all showed the same thing: Daniel Riley, in different places, trapped in the same shadowy form Eli had first seen. Eli felt his throat tighten as he moved closer. Each photo seemed more desperate than the last, the boy's face growing clearer, his eyes pleading. Beneath every picture were more words scratched into the film: "Help me. Find me. Free me." Eli's hands shook as he raised the camera for the final time. He aimed it at the center of the wall, where the largest photo of Daniel hung, his face now fully visible, his eyes locked onto Eli's. Eli pressed the button, and the camera clicked. The flash illuminated the room for just a second, and then darkness returned. Eli stood frozen, waiting for the final photo to develop. Slowly, painfully, the image came into focus. The boy, Daniel, was standing next to Eli in the photograph, his face no longer twisted in fear, but in hope. And beneath the image, in the same jagged handwriting, were the final words: "You found me." Eli looked up from the photo, but the cabin was empty. The Polaroid camera fell silent in his hands, its last picture taken. The mystery was solved, and Daniel Riley was finally free. The camera had done its job. Eli left the cabin that night, the weight of the past lifted from his shoulders. He didn't know what had trapped Daniel, or why the camera had been the key to his release, but one thing was certain: some mysteries were better left unsolved. As he made his way back through the woods, the first light of dawn breaking through the trees, Eli couldn't help but feel like he had witnessed something extraordinary, something beyond the realm of understanding. And as he looked at the last photo one more time, he smiled, knowing that Daniel Riley was finally at peace. Eli placed the camera back on his shelf when he got home, not as a tool for uncovering the past, but as a reminder of the power of stories. Some stories, like Daniel's, waited years to be told. And some, like Eli's, had only just begun.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.